The other thing, I'll try, I think, is I've been experimenting with the how I record it, whether I do side by side or just where it cuts back and forth. And mostly I've been doing side by side, but I kind of want to try the other way. So I might halfway through switch just to see.
Sure.
Okay, so you mentioned there were some things that I'll tell people just so they know that we've had one talk already and we had some sound problems, so we're doing it kind of again, kind of not. And what's different here is that you heard me talking to Paul Vanderklay in my first recent podcast, and so you were interested in talking to me. So this is a little bit different from some of my other ones so far, and we'll see where it goes. So was there anything from last time that you wanted to bring up again?
Yeah. One of the things we talked, or one thing that I feel like we kind of discussed that was piggybacking off of that podcast that I found interesting was when you guys were discussing like what is religion.
Yes,
You
that
know
was
what I
my
mean?
favorite part.
Yeah, it's a bit of it's kind of a good question. Paul even said in that conversation how like he was talking about like how when the British went to India and the Indians had their rituals and their things that they would do, and nothing, they didn't perceive any of that as religious. They didn't perceive any of what they were doing as like necessarily religious. But like I think one of the things he said was like one of the traditions they had is if a husband died that they burn the wife, which I had never heard before. But wow. But yeah, that definitely sounds like religious behavior. And it seems like something you would really do with a religious yeah, with religious ideas in mind. So yeah, I almost wanted to just like throw that ball up in the air and see how you hit it. Like how would you define religion? How do you view it?
Well, I'm very proud of the definition that came up then, because after searching around for a while, all I could think of was it's what those people do in churches, which is to say, I don't know. But at the same time, that kind of, I know I mean something when I think of it, but it's hard for me to pin it down. And I think often it's as if I don't know if that's the best way to put it, as if there are different levels of understanding something. And on the level I'm used to operating on, it's probably the same as a lot of other people, at least in the West, is that we do make a pretty clear distinction between religion and other things. And that may be a mistake, but it's easy to do that. And maybe there's a more thoughtful level, which is where Paul Vanderklay was coming from, where he's saying, well, actually, he views it as I think he said something like the most fundamental map you have for how the world works. And that makes some sense to me. I'm not sure if it's perfect, because to me, a crucial part of a religion would be a deity, I would have thought. It's certainly how I think of it, whether it's entirely correct. But then maybe one could argue that it's almost unavoidable, or it is unavoidable, to have something in your, if not consciously, at least something in your thinking that operates like a deity. Maybe it's inescapable. I don't know. So I find it intriguingly difficult to define. I feel like it's meaningful to talk about religion as if it's a clearly defined thing, but it does get tricky. And I find his definition seems more useful and like a useful direction for me to go in. I like that if you think of it as everyone is religious in his sense, that they have a fundamental map of how things work. There's some idea. It doesn't even mean that it's conscious, I don't think. It just means that they have an idea of how things work, whether they think that there is a dramatic sort of justice to life that they can't explain, or whether they think it's arbitrary. There still might be some way in which it fits together, that ultimately, if you really question them, there is a more religious like way of thinking that they have. I don't know. That seems believable, and it puts everyone on the same playing field. It means there isn't religious people and non-religious people. It's just a matter of what is most fundamental to you, which is interesting to me. So that's what happens when he says that. That's the sort of thing I think of.
There's this critique about religious people that they maybe are less intelligent or or don't want to have or don't want to really explore challenging ideas. And I think that critique would come from the fact that, well, you're basically buying into a whole set of presuppositions and ideas that you don't have any evidence for, and you're kind of just allowing. I remember we talked about this before too. You're kind of just taking this guy's word, this pastor's word for it, or this book's word for it, and kind of not maybe even doing the heavy lifting. And then I remember one thing we talked about though is that you could make the argument that everybody does that. You could, and that you're doing that. You can't help but do that because there is too much information and things to understand in the world, and that offsetting that is almost necessary. Like, for example, like some people believe the earth is flat. Some people believe the earth is round. I'm inclined to think the earth is round, but ultimately the reason I believe that is taking someone else's word for it, because people explain to me how satellites work and how these things work. And so I take their word for it because I don't know how a satellite works. So ultimately there is like some shortcut you have to take with almost everything you do. Because if you literally would like never leave your bedroom if like you had to like understand absolutely how everything works. So to me, like what faith is what religion seeks to do is, like Paul said, create a map of how to understand the world using faith. That one person can look at another man's faith and say that doesn't make any sense, but another person could be like, I can't believe you think the earth is round. Like, how could you think that? And like, have all their reasons why. And like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, none of us really know. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
And so,
I really like that example of round versus flat Earth, because it's quite a humble thing to admit, and I think it's perfectly true. I think it's amazing the number of things that we do and have to take on faith and trust. It almost makes me think that in a way, what you're actually operating in is so much of the way I imagine what the world is actually based on things I've heard and read, and it's as if I'm existing in a world of trust, almost like I'm not actually operating in an objective world, because I never will know what's actually there, and most of it I take on faith. That's half a formed thought. It may not completely make sense, but yeah, I think that's a really good example. It's
as a person of faith, that makes perfect sense. Like, I mean, the Bible has phrases, and these are like complete stumbling blocks to people, like, do not trust in what is seen, look to what is unseen, because what is unseen is eternal. I mean, that is like a stumbling block, because it's, and the Buddha says the same thing. He says like the world and reality, it's all an illusion. And it's all in like, don't believe the illusion, don't invest in it. And like, these are things that if you choose to believe it, you're absolutely like making that leap. We kind of live in a culture today where science is taken more seriously, and it deserves it to an extent. But as an individual, as a man, as just one person, I do think you are taking as much of a leap, because I mean, I don't know if the people who tell me what to believe have my best interest in mind, and if it's really true. Like, for all I know, this is a dream, this is a simulation. There's an infinite amount of things that things could be, and ultimately you have to make your choices for what you think the world is.
Yeah, I agree completely. And
Yeah.
I find that's what I love about philosophy, is that sort of a realization. It simultaneously changes everything, but also in a way changes nothing. And then to me, it leads me to consider, okay, so why do I make the choices that I do? And do I want to keep making the things I trust? And why do other people make the choices they make? And so something I was trying to get at, I think I did a little bit with Pastor Vanderklay, was that what I'm interested in when I'm at my best, if I'm talking to someone who sees something differently, it depends what it is, but especially something big like religion, again, whatever that is I'm trying to see how the way they look at things fits with them, because to varying degrees, you grow into what you believe. You as you grow up, and according to your personality, if you're more creative, then you might believe things that are more intriguing and have to do with transformation. Whereas I'm just guessing, and whereas if you're less creative, maybe you prefer a view that's more stable, and so on. And so the thing to really understand something way before you argue, or if you ever argue over something, is just to understand, why does that make sense to them? And that, to me, is actually much more meaningful and interesting conversation, probably, and more informative.
I agree. I agree. Like, one thing that's interesting is who's drawn to what and why. Like, they've now like mapped out like in personality tests, based on your personality test, whether you're more likely to be religious, whether you're more likely to not be, literally based on your temperament and whether you're high in openness or high in conscientiousness or whatever it is. And so part of it all can be mapped, and it might even be a lot more inevitable from like literally like a
Determinist.
biological
Yeah.
level, deterministic level, where like if you and me want to argue, dude, about like if God exists, like we could do that, like people have forever and ever, or argue about which God is the right God. But it could literally be like, oh well, you're more conscientious and I'm more open.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just not, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just like a total lost cause. Like, never, no one's mind's gonna change, and no like and no, and oftentimes debates I've watched, you usually leave believing what you already believed. But I do like what you're talking about, because if you can put yourself in other people's shoes, get in other people's heads, with different personalities and different thoughts, different worldviews, different experiences, like you said, you can take a more humble approach to life, and you can be more you don't you hopefully you can get along with people better, and gain wisdom.
Yeah, and it's not something I'm particularly good at, and it's still a fairly new idea for me. But it's part of what I want to do with this podcast, is practice doing that, because I have felt, and I think I was right, that if I set it up so I have a podcast that's running for a certain amount of time, this particular episode, I've picked this person, I've sort of studied them, then I'm going to be able to take that approach for that period of time. Maybe I couldn't if they were my neighbor and I bumped into them more often. But if it's a certain amount of time and I've come to it and that's my plan, then I can do it. And so I get to practice being that way, interacting that way, and then hopefully it'll affect the rest of my life. There are a number of things I'm trying to practice, because I'm also trying to practice being honest and direct, and yet only doing it in the spirit of understanding, rather than, no, it's not the spirit of being mean or whatever. And so I'm hoping I can practice that too. And that's going to be harder, I think. But I think there's something about this format, about deciding I'm going to talk to this person and I'm going to try and do this, that makes it easier for me. So it's its own form of therapy, is my hope.
Yeah, I know what you mean by that. I find it therapeutic even listening to these conversations, where whether it was like yours with Paul, or just different opinions, but in a different spirit. Like, do you know who John Vervaeke is?
Yes, I quite like him.
Yeah, I like him too. And he has this thing he talks about, dialogos. I guess it's like Latin. It comes from the word dialogue. But in fact, I should pull up the definition, because it's kind of interesting. It's basically this idea that, one sec, dead air.
That's fine. I can talk while you do it.
No, I got it. It comes from the word logos, and it's like dia means through. It doesn't mean to, I guess, because dia sometimes means to. the picture or image that this derivation suggests is of a stream of meaning flowing among and through and between us. So it's like this conversation that's happening between you and me that isn't is a flow and flows from me to you and back to me. It's like this old idea, and it's where the term dialogue comes from. And I think like this is even like a lot of how they were like creating democracy back in the Greek days, was through this dialogos. Like I think this is like Aristotle and those dudes who were like literally like just finding the wisdom through the dialogue, through like kind of coming at it without ego, coming at it from a third person perspective, and then allowing a dialogue to emerge between the two or multiple people that that started to just cause everyone to learn. You know, the whole was worth more than the sum of its parts, as they say.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really keen to try to set up situations where the kind of irrespective of the content, the kind of conversation is something that I don't normally hear. So what I was trying to do with Vanderklay was I wanted to have a kind of, I'm not actually as atheist as I would like for the conversation to be what I'd hoped, but the idea was that to have someone who says, these are my problems with religion, but they might be wrong. And then someone else who is up to the challenge, who says, okay, I can see why you'd have those problems. Here's some other ways of looking at it. And I've never seen that conversation where both people are, they stick with their position. It's not like, like they're fully inhabited, but they're willing to change it. And whether specifically in that situation, atheism, religion, and real criticisms too, because the criticism, in my mind, there are more powerful criticisms than just dry arguments. To me, if I say, I think your religion has no place for someone with my personality, that's a stronger criticism. And especially if I can bolster it by explaining what I mean by that, it doesn't sound like I'm saying I've got some weird hobby that, creepy hobby that isn't compatible with it. Okay, that's a different issue. But if it really sounds like, yeah, it's a real problem. And that's fundamentally what I think a lot of these things come down to. It's like what you're saying about how we could argue endlessly about religion or politics, and it turns out we're just arguing our biology, and it was almost doomed to be that way. Likewise, if I just find that if my understanding of a particular belief system is that it's incompatible with my interest in constant change and philosophy and so on, and it seems more static and dead, then they're just not getting anywhere until they can, so to speak, sell it to me as something else. I
think that's totally fair. Go ahead.
It's way more interesting to me, and it's actually not that I'm trying to make an argument, but it's a way more powerful conversation if people are putting, and there could be a counterposition from the religious point of view. Someone could say, this is what I think of when I think of someone who rejects religion. This is they really talk about it, and yeah, so that's the kind of thing I'm trying to do, among other things.
Well, that kind of brings something up in me, because the one thing I wrote down, I'm actually about to do another podcast with someone, and very, very interesting person. And one of the things that we're going to talk about, he has like this, he's a Christian, and he has this fundamental kind of like claim he's making that I really want to dig down with him and see what he believes. But I almost want to throw it at you too, because I know it doesn't sound like religion deeply influences your worldview. So like too much. So let me ask you, if I'm not mistaken, but let me ask you this question, because I wrote it down here. He said, all human beings are completely self-motivated. All forms of self-sacrifice and altruism is a myth. What do you think of that?
I think that there are, see if I know I've thought about this, so I'm going to see if I can dig up my thought on it without it being too dead and dry. my impression was that there are at least two forms of selfish, like what I call good selfish and bad selfish. So fundamentally, you're doing something for a reason, and it's because you were motivated to do it. So you could call that selfish. As far as I know, for now, I can't get past that view. But within that, you can be motivated to do things. It's as though that's the overarching motivation. But then within that, there's the conventional world where we normally talk about selfish as being selfish in a way which is not, none of your motivations are to take into account other people. So you can be, but if they are, then you could still argue that you're doing it because you're motivated to do it and because in some way it benefits you psychologically, even if maybe it's a sacrifice that causes you damage of some kind. So I can certainly, I think selfish is a questionable word, because selfish means in contrast to other, I think in order for it to be meaningful, it has to mean instead of other people. You're choosing yourself over other people. If you said you're always doing something because fundamentally you want to do it or you're motivated to do it, that's one thing. But I think it's kind of a trick or a confusion with words to say selfish. I think that's like a clickbaity title. I think I understand the underlying philosophy, and there's probably useful things you can do with it. But to me, selfish is only useful in contrast to being selfless. And there are things you can do that, at least on one level, are you choosing other people over yourself? So those are not selfish things, even though you're still doing it because you're motivated to do it. Does that make sense?
It does. So I think this is the argument he would make. And let me ask it in the form of a question. Is giving up your life for your son a purely selfless act? He would say that it is not a purely selfless act to give up your life for another person because of biological drives, psychological drives, you believing ultimately that this is what's best for you. What would you say to that?
I think I may have missed a little bit of it or not been quite focusing. So he's saying that if you're doing something that's apparently self-sacrificing, such as for your son, that you're still doing it because you're biologically pushed to do it.
Not even necessarily, like, yeah, like, because and like by biologically, like, he's making this claim that every action you do, even thought that you have, is for your own survival and even for your own ultimate gain and ultimate whatever, even your self-sacrificial things. And that he even says the reason you do those self-sacrificial things is like, oftentimes he says, like, essentially because you have no other options. And so it will be the ultimate thing you'll do simply because of your own because it fits into it's still a selfish act, essentially. What do you think of that?
I still would fit it into what I said before, which is that I can appreciate that in an ultimate sense you're doing everything for, and it could be a biologically self-serving reason, or you could be confused, right? You can do things that are absolutely not self-sacrificing or that aren't good for anybody, including you. Just like you can just stay up till 3 a.m. playing games or something, and it can just be a mistake, or you can be confused or something. But I understand that ultimately it may be some conscious or unconscious mechanism or motivation that is for you. But I still think within that there are selfish and unselfish acts. So yes, you could say that the most self-sacrificing thing is still in that sense done for because some part of you wants to do it or is choosing to do it. But I question why you would call it selfish unless you're up to something. Like, it sounds like what's the point?
So the idea would be, his ultimate idea would be that with this in mind, understanding that every action is a selfish action, what we as people need to understand is that we are being driven by a force within ourselves, our ego, that actually it seeks to essentially be God and essentially be, you know, it literally like does, and it's a desire within each one of us to dominate the rest. And he says that the only reason we don't is because as we get older, we realize we're incapable, and then we look for new vicarious ways to dominate each other. And he uses examples like, for example, getting on board with ideology and different things that if I can't dominate the world, I can dominate the world vicariously through other things. But it's ultimately the goal is to dominate. And so the ultimate argument is that until that is recognized, no change can happen. What would you say?
I'd say this is the sort of conversation that would have to take place very carefully over a fairly long period of time, which is certainly not something that I can do just in the middle of talking to you.
It's a very interesting conversation.
Two things come to mind. I mean, I've already forgotten one of them. I guess I'll start with the one I do remember, which is that this is the kind of conversation where I can imagine if I tried to debate it, because I feel inspired to debate it, the other person might actually have more facts and information on their side. They've thought it through, and so they can make an impressive case. Maybe not. But all along, I would have this feeling somehow this person's made a mistake. Something's wrong here. And this goes back to our earlier conversation about checking how personalities mix with things. It could be that the language they use I'm interpreting differently. It could be that there's something about our personalities that is mismatched in such a way that we're looking at it differently. But it also could be I'm suspicious of the motivation for a person to take the information they've taken and present it that way and have that perspective, because it sounds like it's, I don't know who I'm criticizing here. I'm trying not to criticize anyone on this show, but it sounds
it's not a person, it's an idea, right? So
well, but
and yeah.
Yes and no. This is where I say it's a more powerful and personal way of critiquing things, to go the personality route, because I can say, okay, your belief system might make a certain amount of sense. It might even be more coherent than mine, but I feel like there's something wrong with a person wanting to believe it. And that's actually important. That's not just me saying it's nasty, I don't like it, because it means that actually, and again, this is just my understanding of what you're saying, so it hopefully has nothing to do with any actual person. But
this is really interesting. Keep going.
Somehow, maybe I'm just justifying myself, but I really do think if it's possible for someone to be essentially believing the right things for the wrong reasons. This is the extreme of this view. It's a hypothetical. I'm not sure it actually happens. And my belief is that if someone had all kinds of accurate facts at hand and they could believe the right thing for the wrong reason, and that makes it wrong because they're going to do it wrong. They're not doing it sincerely, or they're doing something maliciously. There's something off. And I have no defense if someone says this sounds like I'm just justifying my own position or I'm being indulgent. Maybe all I say is, yeah, it's a sort of, I hope it's an enlightened form of indulgent. But
that's really interesting. Like what I found interesting is like I like that you're not even really making as much of an intellectual argument as much as you're speaking intuitively. There's something about what I'm saying that doesn't feel right. It's kind of what you're saying. What is that?
What is it?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is I'm just going to reel off a list of knee-jerk intuitions about someone who would promote this way of believing, and I don't know that I want to do that. I'm not trying to take issue with people, and yet that's exactly what I'd be doing. I really don't. There could be no more fundamental way of. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
I was going to say there may be no more fundamental way of criticizing someone than saying, I don't care what you believe. I think there's something wrong with the fact that you are going for it. like on the one hand, it sounds like a completely empty critique. On the other hand, it's pretty fundamental. It's almost saying,
Right.
so I don't want to do that, especially for someone I don't even know. I just say, let's see if there's a way I can do it that's only talking about me rather than talking about someone else. About what makes me uncomfortable. I would be concerned if I was doing that, if I was using the terms that you're using, selfish and dominating, right? Those are the two words that jump out at me. I could imagine a me in a different universe doing that because I wanted to be shocking and because I wanted to be harsh, and because, I guess on a positive side, because I want to have a really realistic, fearless belief system. Like I'm acknowledging the fact that I'm selfish. I'm acknowledging the fact that I want to dominate. I'm sure that there's great truth to those for anyone to say that of themselves, probably. So it's got a real blonde honesty to it going for it. It reminds me of, I don't know if that's a useful idea to bring in. It reminds me of the term that Jordan Peterson was sort of trying to popularize, which is you can have white lies, perhaps, which are lies that you do for the greater good, and then you can have black truths, which are truths which are done for evil, essentially, or for harm. And it's a big question. If you're trying to be more honest, the obstacle I immediately run into is a lot of the time where I'm motivated to be honest, but I'm not. It's because I'm motivated by resentment and I'm actually trying to be hurtful. So it doesn't seem like a good idea to voice that. And so it kind of seems related in that it feels like, yes, it's a powerful, honest, potentially humble perspective to say, I know I'm selfish fundamentally. Everyone is selfish. I know that that from an early age I've had an inclination to dominate, but I wasn't good enough at it, so I chose other things. It seems like there's a humility and a sort of a power to that point of view. But I could imagine saying those things. If I was to say those things, it would possibly be out of a desire to be seen as someone who was like that, and I might be actually doing it to satisfy some other need to be seen that way. I'm not sure. I'm getting a little bit lost.
This is great what you're saying. I'm really glad I asked it. If I'm understanding you right, you're kind of saying this is a black truth. If it's a truth, it would be more of a black truth. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, or the spirit in which, the way I can imagine a person having this view would be in the spirit of a black truth. Like it seems like it's this very powerful, honest perspective. I say powerful because it's admitting something very dark and ugly potentially about people and about oneself. So it seems very powerful in that way. And it's okay. I'm going to just wander into something else I'm afraid to get into. It's like the idea of comparing abilities, most likely cognitive abilities across different races. I think,
right.
Never mind what the information is. It's reasonable to be suspicious of anyone who's really enthused about making the comparison. And I'm sure people are overly concerned on occasion and not concerned enough on other occasions. But anyways, the point is, it's the same thing where, okay, there may be truth to that, but watch how you use it. And more importantly, watch why you're using it. Are you doing it to be cool, essentially? And
so I really appreciate what you're saying, and I don't even feel the need to necessarily defend the idea, but to introduce more to it, he's deeply Christian, and a lot of that the idea that we are motivated like that is a Christian idea, that there's all kinds of books written about and all kinds of ideas, original sin, versus like all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, that we have this wicked, sinful fleshly desire, and it's an idea that goes pretty deep in Christian mythology and just belief. And so his what he continues to say is that this desire to dominate is a unquenchable thirst that you cannot satisfy. It is an absolute, you have this desire to do it, but you cannot do it. It is impossible. It is literally impossible, because as soon as I reach the understanding of my limitations, it is impossible for me, like just a simple, like, I am only one man. Like like you see those movies where the one guy fights off 300 bad guys and, they all fall, and I can't do that. And so you realize your limitations, that you can't dominate this world, but then you realize that you can't even dominate the world vicariously through others. And so he goes all the way to say, it's not until you accept that you cannot dominate that now you're ready to see past the illusion of trying to dominate anything, and then begin to serve something greater, in his case, God. So it's interesting what you said, because like the first thing you considered was like, well, I wonder if there's malicious intent here. I don't know if there is, but it's definitely like an interesting space to explore. Like you said, like the same thing with intelligence, like this can go bad real quick, but it also is like one of those questions that you if we ask, we can hopefully find an answer to. So that's why I brought it up.
Well, and two, as I think of it, when you put it in that context, if it's sort of a matter of, here's another way I could imagine taking a direction I could imagine taking that line of thinking, and maybe it's the direction that he takes, is it can be useful, it seems, to really dwell on things about me that I don't like as a way of feeling humble and ready to change. And maybe that's part of what that is. And I wouldn't criticize someone for doing that particularly. So perhaps that would be another answer for what the appeal is, so to speak, for viewing, a reason for viewing things that way, is maybe it aids transformation, maybe it aids humility. Yeah, I mean, that was my response to what you were saying on the specific choice of words, but I could imagine the actual way that it would manifest in someone's life who believe that could be very different from what I was imagining when I was talking. So
and there are dark implications, like if that was true, that kind of makes the argument that like civilization itself is like a sham, and it's only people who are buying into it that are actually operate on that level, while the true psychopaths amongst us are just killing and eating and destroying. You know what I mean? Which there might even be some truth to that. It's an interesting thing to think about.
it may very much be one of those things where you really have to see how a particular person pulls it off. I found one of the things I really like with podcasts is that I get to see such a variety of people, that I can hear a perspective that normally I just assumed went with a certain kind of person, and they're doing this certain thing and I didn't like them. And then someone totally different does it, and I realized that it could be a whole different thing. So, essentially it means that it gives me a way to get past my own particular biases. And so, yeah, this is probably something where I'd want to see. Will your podcast, will you be recording it?
Yeah, I'll send it to you when it's done. Yeah, I'm actually recording it in like an hour.
Okay. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely watch that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go into it like I want to attack this space as well as I can, because it's like the foundation of his argument. So I want to try to attack it the best I can, but then go with it and see where it where we go with it, because it's quite a statement. So that's what I'd like to know the most is how we justify it, because it's a very cynical statement in a way.
Well, that's my concern.
Right. Right. And so, one of the first questions I want to ask him is, isn't this a bit cynical?
And again, what I would say, and if you're looking for possible ideas to add in, and is
Yeah.
yeah, it's not, I would say the thing with being cynical is, you'd say, well, I could be right. You could be right, but do you want to be cynical? Do you want this to be true? Like, I would go back to trying to understand motivations or for taking a particular view, not just motivations, but what, because it sounds almost like a cheap character attack, and that's not, I don't think that's what this method is. I don't know. I'm trying to think, there was one other thought I had about that. I don't know. Yeah, anyways.
Motivation matters. Motivation, like with anything,
Well,
like it matters.
Well, my theory is that it determines what you're doing in many ways, like what you're actually up to. So I can think that I'm trying to help someone because I'm trying to help them, and then I can realize I'm trying to help them because I got absolutely nothing done that day, and I wanted to feel like I got something done, and it wasn't really about them. And that's actually an exaggeration of a character trait I think I do have. So I'm going to use that as an example. It's actually something that I've noticed. And so essentially, even though you could say, well, objectively, you're doing something good. Yeah, but if the motivation was really to compensate for something that I did wrong earlier in the day, then that could cover, maybe I want to make sure that they appreciate it, or maybe I want to make sure that people see it, or, and then it starts to actually poison the interaction. So that's why I think, yeah, intention. And I've had this, it's sort of this idealistic, moralistic way of thinking for a long time, which is that it's almost as if intention is more important than what you do. The intention to me actually is what the thing is. If you want to, and objectively that's wrong, but it still seems important to me.
So what came up with me when you just said that was, let's make the opposite argument. Let's make the argument that everybody's a good person deep down, and everybody really just ultimately wants to do the right thing. But what if I say that with the wrong intention? And I say that so that you trust me, and so that, you do what I want you to do, or whatever the ultimate agenda is. The tricky part is it really is about intention, because I might say something you don't want to hear with the right intention, or I might say something that, yeah, we're all good people, aren't we? But meanwhile, I don't even believe that. So intention is crucial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't worked out a clear way of thinking about it or expressing it, but because obviously, because it's easy to say that what your actions ultimately are is more important than your intention. But I don't know. I guess too, that even if you do something that seems to be beneficial, but for, let's say, malicious reasons, then if you have those malicious reasons over time, it's more likely that you'll actually do something malicious. So maybe it's more of a long-term moral way of looking at things. It's not a practical way. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's interesting. I haven't fully worked that out.
Yeah.
I brought a few things to ask about. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about that, or can I bring something up that I?
No. Thanks for answering it. It was it's a strange question to ask.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping it's not too niche in the sense that well, we'll see whether anyone watches these or not. I don't know. I'm trying not to worry too much. But when I started this, I had this idealistic idea of every episode being this extremely intense, not perfectly planned, but I'd come in with all these great questions that nobody ever asks and all this stuff. And what I found is I've been doing what I wanted to do, but it's just much milder than I had imagined. I would say regarding intent, that is one of the things that is the theme of my channel. I'm curious to know whether it comes out at all. It's supposed to be the theme of it, it's about the context or the style of conversation more than the content. It's, I want to talk to people that are seen as being unusual, whether it's because they have some conditions, a mental condition, whatever it is. And I want to talk to them in a very direct way that normally people wouldn't necessarily unless they're really good friends. And I think that process will actually help integrate people with any kind of differences, I'm hoping. And it's not quickly trying to get over something that seems unusual. You know, my example that I put in my ad is if someone's missing an arm, that's a very mundane difference, but it's still something that you might have a response to. And I want to really carefully work through that rather than just rather than instantly think, oh, it's silly for me to feel strange or awkward about that. I should get over it. But no, let's work through it. Let's talk about what both of us feel and so on. And so to me, just the fact of having those sorts of conversations is almost more important than the content. So I'm hoping. Anyway, so I think hopefully that's something we've been doing in our own way, is just talking about things that in a way that is unusual.
Yeah, I think so.
This was my intriguing thought of the morning. I thought I also had an interesting question for you, or an hour before we started, and then I lost it completely and I didn't write it down in time. So I'm going to read this out and then I'm going to translate it because it was written just to quickly be meaningful to me. How do you, or how does anyone distinguish genuine religion, spirituality, or intuition from bias, self-centeredness, or superstition? So this is related to what we talked about the first time about what I was calling ethnocentrism and how I thought religion could justify it, or people would use it to justify it. But it's, at the time, it seemed really relevant. It's how do you, one of the perhaps unconscious, certainly me not fully identified suspicions I would have of someone who was talking about their religious, say they're talking about prayer. I would think, well, in order to believe in prayer, and again, I'm not saying this is my final statement. This is just, I'm giving voice to this particular concern. In order to believe in prayer, you have to believe that you're being paid attention to specifically. You think that fundamental to the operation of the universe is your life and your thoughts. And that seems, how is that different from being self-centered? Well, let's suppose that it could be different. Let's suppose that there is something genuinely, a way of genuinely being spiritual, or religion is true, or whatever. Nonetheless, there's still going to be who do that in a self-centered way. There are people who are going to be superstitious, which to me is related to being self-centered. It's anything, name something superstitious that isn't based on thinking that the world revolves around you and your thoughts and your culture and your language. I don't know if it exists. If I
say that last part one more time.
I will see if I can say it more compactly. Here's an example of being casually superstitious. Say I'm afraid to say something good, some hope I have, because I think if I say it, I'm going to jinx it. I say, no, I seem to be doing, the podcast is going really well. I haven't said anything too foolish yet. It's good. Well, if I think that that's somehow something is going to make me have bad luck because of that, that's as if I think an evil being is watching me, listening to me, and is going to punish me or, but do something mean to me because I'm optimistic. I think that, to me, that's what I would mean if I'm superstitious in that way. And so to me, at least a lot of things I think of as superstitious have that self-centered, some being cares about what I think mentality to it. Another example that I like to pick on is in homeopathy, I believe. There's a thing where you can write out.
What's homeopathy?
Homeopathy, it's a particular, like a traditional form of medicine, I think. I don't know its origins. I just know I've heard of it. I think one of the principles they have is that you can cure something with a highly diluted version of the same thing, which is similar to like vaccines and maybe antivenom. So I'm not saying it's, but one thing I thought was fishy was that you could write down medicinal ingredients, the name of them on a piece of paper, and it was supposed to have some benefit. And to me, in order for
just writing them down.
Just write it down. This is my understanding. And even if I've got it wrong, it'll still illustrate the example of what I think is a core element of superstition. And hopefully all this long-winded stuff will be valuable in a minute. And to me, the reason a person would find that believable most likely would be because they think that somehow it is relevant to the operation of the universe, what their intent is and what their language is. Because if they're writing in their language, does this mean that some being is, or the universe is interpreting their written words? Does it work if I write it in French? So it just sounds like it's an invitation to being self-centered. to thinking that things revolve around you. So the question is, and this is really open-ended, so anything you think of will be interesting. That's a concern I would have with whenever someone says they're doing something religious or spiritual, is that they're inviting that in, because what's useful about a religion or spiritual practice is that it's specifically focused on you, in a sense, that your actions have meaning, that you have a purpose, that the world can make moral sense to you, that there may be a story to your life. It's not just meaningless. In order for it to be meaningful, that makes it relevant to you. So it's flirting with self-centeredness. Does that make sense? The thing is, any thoughts on the difference between something which is genuinely religious as opposed to superstitious? If I define superstitious as this more...
There's so much there.
I'm not asking you to actually come up with an answer that's perfect. I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on it.
No, I don't. There's definitely not a perfect answer. Okay. We might think that meditation, just sitting quietly by yourself doing nothing, makes no sense until we start studying the brain waves and start realizing that they're entering a different space that is now creating, causing them to access different parts of their brain associated with creativity, also giving them a better sense of well-being, and that can be done in a completely secular way. They've also done brain scans on people who speak in tongues and stuff like that, and they're accessing a different part of their brain.
That's interesting. I did not know about that.
Yeah, so the reason I bring up those two examples is because what we look at as religious or superstitious today, tomorrow we might call perfectly valid scientific. And also what we call perfectly valid science today might sound like woo-woo the way alchemy did not too long ago. So I don't know, but like the answer to the question, but I know that in the effort to be boldly ambivalent, I would want to explore it all open-mindedly. I do think you run into a danger in saying that anything works, but saying anything doesn't work at the same time. Like you said that they could get healed by just writing down the ingredients. Is that what you said?
That's my understanding of the theory. And again, if that's wrong, it still illustrates my feelings about superstition.
So did you ever have to write lines when you were in school?
I'm homeschooled actually, so no.
Okay. When I was in school, I was always bad, and I always had to write lines, and it's a form of brainwashing, right? I will not yell out in class. I will not yell out in class, and there is an actual effect that it will affect your behavior. There's reports of people that have literally, like, through meditation, focused, and they claim to have been unable to walk, and like literally like envisioned their nervous system in their spine reconnecting or whatever, and now they walk according to their report. I actually don't put anything outside of the realm of possibility. I think that anything could be considered superstition. To some people, they might make the argument that wearing the mask is superstitious because it doesn't block the virus the way some others say it does. People have that debate. So I don't know, to answer the question. But the only thing I would say is that I don't know. I'd be careful making an absolute claim one way or another, saying that this doesn't work or that it does. Because it can, and people report it to have worked. In terms of, like, we were asking kind of what makes something legitimate, what legitimizes something versus not. I don't know if anyone has the authority to make that call. Like if, okay, like I know you had a girl who was diagnosed schizophrenic. What's the difference between an episode she has and someone who claims they had an angelic encounter? What's the difference? And is one legit and one not? Are they both schizophrenic experiences? You know, some religions and worldviews don't even believe in mental illness, and would like be like, oh, like that thing you saw or that experience you had, like we have spiritual language for that. You know, so what you're saying is like, so it's such like a good question with an answer I don't have, but like it pulls so much out of me because it's such a fair question to ask, but the problem is that people have tried to ask this question, and then they created books. You know, the Bible is 66 of them, and they say, here's the book with all the answers, and this is all you need to know, and this is all the legitimate spirituality.
Yeah.
And then that's legitimate. Well, you know, like it, and then guess what? There's 1,000 different interpretations of that stuff, and 1,000 different like things that people believe regarding like angels, for example. Some believe that they still visit you. Some people don't, you know, stuff within just the believers of that book. So, I mean, what you're saying, it like presses every button for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't actually mean to imply that that anything in particular that I might cite as an example of superstition is obviously to be discounted. I don't mean that. I just mean that I think there's definitely a way of thinking about things, events, the world, that is self-centered and perhaps neurotic. And I think probably pretty much everyone feels it in themselves, where they'll have some weird little thing they do, or whether it's feeling that they don't want to voice their optimism about something too much because that'll make something bad happen, or whether it's, what would be another common, I'm trying to think of something. Fortunately, I don't get that too much. I'm trying to think of what I might get. Well, I've actually, in my own way, talked to a deity most of my life, while simultaneously saying that I don't know that it exists. And I don't know how common that is. If, you know, when push comes to shove, if I forget, there was someone else I heard who was saying that they consider themselves fairly atheist, but nonetheless, when they're really desperate, they still ask for help. That doesn't mean that there's anything there. It just means that's what they do. It'd be easy to explain that away. But the point is that I would argue that even if there was, to choose an extreme example, let's say that there is this God, this entity that a person can talk to and pray to, and they pay attention, and a person could still be superstitious in the way they approach that. That is to say, they could, instead of being motivated by, what would be, I don't want to say what's a good way to be motivated, but you can always find a way to do something which is kind of neurotic and self-centered. You know, I can think that there's the question to me is, can a person imagine that what they're doing might not work? So if I am praying, have I ever considered the fact that it might just be something I do, not that there's anyone to receive it? If a person has, perhaps, maybe if I've never entertained that idea, I've never been able to get outside of it and think, yeah, this is what I do. There may be something to it, there may not be. If I can't get beyond it, then I'm just doing it because that's what I do it. It's almost certainly sort of a self-centered thing. I just think, well, of course, someone's paying attention to what I say, or something like that. Of course, my thoughts are important to the universe. Well, maybe they aren't, but maybe they are. So I'm just trying to distinguish between, and thinking it's useful to think about. I don't know if there's even a way to, even asking a question, but it seems useful to think about the fact that a person could go through seemingly religious motions for completely self-absorbed reasons, or not. But
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. One thing like the Bible says, you'll know them by their fruit. So like people make the argument that like for example, within a Christian tradition, they might say those who have spiritual experiences but don't see any positive change from them aren't legitimate. I could see that argument, because if you're not, if you know, if how are you experiencing God and then not, you know, maybe you're not changing. But then you could also make an argument that the people who don't have those experiences also don't change. But I do think that if you're having experiences and you're seeing positive results from them, or you're seeing, or you know, it's giving you any type of peace or anything like that, that can be, I mean, I don't, you know, you know, that is, that to me is something to follow. I'd also make the argument that it's because people are like intimidated by this stuff or don't want to talk about it or whatever. And it's like, I think it's worth exploring, even if it's wrong, even if it's not true or illegitimate. I think it's worth exploring. It's a question worth asking. The worst case, in like, I had a really bad mushroom experience when I was young, but like, and like, yeah, it was tough and it took a long time to even get over. But you know, I don't regret it. And there's plenty of like experiences you can have in life that are negative that ultimately also get you where you need to be too. So it's a good question, and I don't know the answer, man.
Yeah, I guess more than anything, I just think it's useful if people wanted to talk about religion, say hypothetically there was a discussion or a debate between someone who was considered themselves to be religious and someone who considered themselves not to be. I think that's a useful thing to bear in mind, is that it's easy to dismiss someone who says that they have a religion with someone who's being superstitious and thinking conveniently, and they may be, they might not be. But the point is that just to be aware of that as something which I think is going to be hanging over the conversation, whether it's dealt with or not. But it isn't necessarily correct, I don't think. And yeah, I guess a lot of I place, for me, I do find self-awareness is really valuable. If someone appears to be aware of how something appears to other people, so if they say, yeah, I know this sounds strange, but you know, it actually makes sense to me. Do you want to know how? Or for a while I thought when I was praying it was just to make me, it was self-indulgent and it was superstitious, but then I realized it was actually helping, and blah blah blah. You know, anything like that wins me over really easily. So I don't know what to make of that, but
it's complicated, man. I mean, the placebo effect is very real, right? The placebo effect, there's plenty of situations where literally the belief that something would do something has the effect of making it happen.
yeah.
So, I mean, I just think we live in a stranger world than we're admitting.
Yes. Even the people who I think strange things probably don't realize how strange it is, or potentially don't realize how strange it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite something. That was there anything else you wanted to bring up? Because I've been talking a lot. So if there's something you'd like to bring up, would be good.
No. I found the last portion of this really stimulating.
Okay. Well, there was something else. If you want to really talk at the edges of my understanding, anyways, I was watching the other day. I've been slowly working through the second latest podcast that Jordan Peterson put out about magic mushrooms, with a magic mushroom science.
I loved that podcast.
It's long. I don't, because I don't have an easy way to get it on my phone. I don't have a data plan or anything. So I have to be in front of the computer or in the room listening. So I just take it in, 15-minute chunks at this point. But he said something, as I understand it, they're talking about consciousness and its role in what he would call being, probably, which is a person's experience of things as opposed to the notion of objective reality. And oh darn, I see if I can remember this. If you remember this, jump in, because I should have gone over it more beforehand. But it was interesting. He was saying that you can imagine okay, it's not clear how much consciousness clearly, or a person's experience of things is clearly, a lot of your idea of what's out in the world is based on your experience of it. Okay, I'm really rearranging what he said, but this is what it meant to me. There's the idea of there being an objective world, but you can never test it ultimately, in the sense that you never know what's really out there. You just know what your experience of it is, and then you can talk to other people who you assume are real, but you don't know, and compare your experiences and so on. But that, so you don't actually know what, you can imagine a world without any consciousness, any entities perceiving it, just sitting there. But what you're imagining is what it would look like to you, which is itself a subjective being's experience. So it's impossible to, even the idea of there being an objective world is actually even more of an abstraction than I realized, because it's impossible for a person to imagine it just existing out there without having a look, because colors are something, if you're seeing, if it has a look, that's something how your eyes interpret it. It has a smell, that's how you smell things. So to imagine supposedly the most real basic scientific idea is that there's an objective world, and yet it's the most bizarre thing to try and imagine what it would be without anyone perceiving it. I don't know what to do.
You could argue it takes more faith to believe that, when it's just as easy to believe in an invisible sky daddy, up in the sky, that you pray to. It's just as easy to believe that as it is this argument that there is an absolute objective truth, or an objective reality, like that, or more specifically, an objective reality that can be known. Because right. we can hypothesize an objective reality, but if nobody can be up in the sky looking down and really see it all from that omnipresent, it's funny because the idea of an objective world, like that's actually like a spiritual concept.
It's like it's like a God's eye view. Yes.
Right. Like when I'm doing this, what am I talking about?
I know.
Right?
That's I got it.
Yeah, I agree. That mushroom podcast, man, I highly recommend you finish it. Jordan Peterson brought up something that I was thrilled that he brought up, where they start challenging, they start interviewing religious leaders, mm-hmm. and taking them through psychedelic trips, and then there's, and like part of the whole experiment they haven't fully released, so they can't release all the data yet of exactly how well it went, but the implication is it went very well, and like for these spiritual leaders, and apparently like they felt very, like, I remember Jordan Peterson used the term psychedelically enhanced pastors, and then he makes this argument at the end of it of, isn't it the church's responsibility to not shun this stuff, but to provide explanations for the experiences people are having, and perhaps even integrate it into religion? Which is like, thank you for saying that, because I have a buddy and we talk about this all the time, and yeah, I think so, as crazy as it sounds.
That would be a great reality show. Psychedelically enhanced pastors. That would be.
Well, the part of the argument. Yeah, that sounds so cool. Well, you'd go, right? You'd probably go. Like, I mean, I'm always interested in the wild stuff, right? So when I lived in North Carolina, I was looking for those snake handling churches. Have you heard of them? The ones that hold snakes. You should Google it. They put big boa constrictors around there. It's based on a scripture that says you will hold snakes and you will not be bitten. And so I think they've like stopped doing it because they started getting press. But I wanted to go check it out, right? Because I just want to know what people are doing, But like, I would go to that church, man.
Those sermons would be interesting to listen to.
Yeah, dude. But like, there's, like when I did LSD, all I was talking about, it was cliche. I was just talking about love. Mm-hmm. Like, it was cliche, but I was literally like, and I was literally talking about how like my wife recorded it, but it was this whole idea of like how, because there's no love in politics. Politics is a vain thing to even pursue because there's no love. So it's just we shouldn't even do it. It was like this long thing about like love and politics. Yeah.
That's kind of as far as my thinking on politics has gone, is I appreciate that it may be the best thing we've got for solving those problems, but I don't understand how it's supposed to work. Like it's just,
No, yeah. No, but I and like, and for me, this is just kind of speaking from the heart or whatever, but like I think that we're kind of in trouble. And I think that I think we all need like some type of spirituality. Like one thing I heard someone say in a podcast recently is like, one thing that the internet's really done, like you and me don't know each other, but what the internet's really done is like, we're all connected now. We're all in this same boat together, right? Whether it's like COVID-19 or global warming or whatever it is, the experience is becoming very much the same for everyone. And there is something religious about that, especially in the face of existential threat. And so I think that, you know, this is even what we talked about last time, but was like part of like even these dialogues and these conversations to me are like part of like what gives me hope that some type of spirituality can be formed. Because because to me, it's almost like, I think in so many ways, the social contract has been broken, and you see it in politics more than anything. And there has to be some type of agreement amongst all the earthlings. You know, we all have to we have to forgive.
that
We have
seems
to
important.
forgive,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add to that, but yeah, that it is interesting. I'm really excited to see what happens with being able to just talking to people. It's so fun to be able to just sit here in my house talking to people. When I imagined doing this, I imagined always doing in-person conversations because I thought it was important, just even just for the visual, just to have it. But it's so neat to be able to contact people all over the place and just to get something, learn something about what's going on for them. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of fearful with the podcast of all the negative stuff that happens with the internet, but so far it's just been fun. And
Yeah.
I hope more people contact me. I'm happy to talk to people, recording, not recording. I try to be somewhat particular about what goes up, so it may not make it up, but yeah, it's who knows where it might go.
Yeah, man. Who knows? but I think, yeah, you're saying something I was gonna say, but I don't remember anymore. But yeah, dude. I think if it like there, like with everything that's like been going on, like even, oh, now I remember when you were saying about like wanting to do things in person and now you're doing everything online. It's interesting how we've all been forced into the situations that we have been forced into, that we probably wouldn't have been doing if it weren't for the way everything has gone down. And to me, the way I interpret, what I've come to do is interpret everything as God's plan and what God ultimately wants, no matter how difficult that gets. And then instead of trying to resist the bad things, find the new opportunity and the good things that happen. Because I'm kind of in a similar situation. Like, this isn't necessarily the way I'd want to even communicate with someone, but I have felt just like kind of like I need to. And I was like, and I watched like this one video from Jonathan Peugeot, and it was like, okay, I just gotta like start getting involved. I just gotta start doing something. I feel it. And like, it's just interesting how like you get bottlenecked into a situation you didn't want to be into, but then it guides you exactly where you're supposed to be, hopefully.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I do sometimes
Yeah.
see things that way as well. And again, it's a perfect example. Is that me being sort of optimistic and superstitious, or am I actually listening to, whisperings of the divine or something? I don't
I
know.
posted a video yesterday about doubt, and it's good to doubt. I think it's really good to doubt, and that all doubts need to be considered and explored. Like Jordan Peterson's thing about going into the belly of the well to rescue your father. Like the way I interpret that is like stare into that abyss, ask all the hard, dark questions, and see if there's something redemptive to be found in it. So, like for me, I know I've found that I actually just suffer more now when I fight the idea that God is in control, because if I don't believe God's in control, I'll just start making decisions and doing things that cause me to suffer. But if I believe that, it's a choice, I have to choose it, but I'll feel peace, and then I just simply trust that everything that's supposed to be will be, whatever that is.
Yeah, it's an interesting shift. But I can imagine it would open me up too to seeing. I think you kind of said this, seeing what is possible in a situation. It's maybe a perfect example of something which can sound kind of simplistic and like wishful thinking, but at the same time, I can imagine putting me in a state where, I'm not forcing my opinions on things as much. It's okay, here I am. What should I do next? It was asking that question more often, perhaps, and looking for cues from people, from the circumstances. So, yeah, it'll be interesting.
Cool, man.
Yeah, cool. I think we're probably winding down now, right? Because are you on the other podcast in half an hour? Is that right?
I am, and I gotta pee. But but this has been really. I'm really glad actually we re-recorded one, because the first one was good, but this one was really good.
I hope so. I'm worried that there was too much of me talking in it, and I don't remember everything that I said, but that's the way it goes.
I was worried there was too much of me talking in the first one, so we're even.
Okay, well, I'm glad I talked to you. I'll keep an eye on your channel, and maybe we'll check in again sometime.
Cool. Awesome,
okay.
Man.
Great to talk to you.
Take care.